Once again, another instance of potential fraud and really the fallout from the immense fraud scandal that has rocked Minnesota.
Ilhan Omar, the representative from Minnesota, as well as the two senators, Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith, have earmarked $1 million. So in the grand scheme of things, not a ton in terms of earmarks for non-government agencies and things of that nature in Minnesota. $1 million that would go to a nonprofit that is works to create a better, safer, more connected community for individuals experiencing drug addiction and substance use disorders in the greater East African community of the Twin Cities metro area. They have a single line item earmark for $1 million in the next round of funding that is going to go before a fight that people have now been like, wait, why now? Why is this $1 million so important now? Because, and for them, the devil's advocate, why would they think it's a good idea? Let's raise a spotlight on one single organization at the time when all this is going on. It raises questions not just about how things work in Minnesota, but also the use of taxpayer money in this way, the special interest, the earmarking of special projects like this.
When you look up, where's this $1 million going to right now? And that is earmarked from some of these leaders in Minneapolis. And you realize it's going to a addiction recovery center that may or may not be actually in a restaurant, that you at least would question the authenticity.
You would think that the political ramifications for, you saw how Tim Walz denied that there was even a fraud problem as it kept growing, and all of a sudden he has to not run again. That the senators and Ilhan Omar would think maybe at a time where this debate is raging, so much so that our preferred person as governor of the state, because he was also the nominee for the vice presidency of the United States just some months ago, maybe we shouldn't be earmarking it's not even like it was an earmark for addiction recovery in Minneapolis to go to the state agency to then dole it out. This was an earmark for $1 million of Department of Justice money to go to this group. And I think a lot of people in American consciousness may think of if an individual group gets a grant of $1 million, which is so funny that we're sitting here thinking $1 million isn't a lot of money.
Yeah. Well,
because of how widespread the fraud that has been uncovered is.
Yeah, when the $1 billion words start throwing around, then $1 million is again, it's nothing.
Right. But this group, and we say, it shared an address with a restaurant, all these things. That doesn't sound like the groups that in your head are the ones getting $1 million grants directly from the federal government. It doesn't say that we're not trying to say they don't do good things. They don't have it together. But it just sounds like I would think that the groups that are getting $1 million grants are ones that have a building, that have a track record of dealing with these issues that they're getting, that there is a stewardship involved when the federal government is making a direct grant. But we know that's not the case. And I think that's why this goes even beyond fraud. It shows how broken the system is when it comes to how Congress spends your money. This is federal dollars. And it's just, we're going to do this and we don't care about the optics. We know it's going to be elevated because it's potentially another shutdown fight coming. Of course, they're going to scrutinize everything they can, but they're going to name a group, and not just the representative, but co-sponsored by both senators from the state.
We're going to find out, I am sure, that Minnesota is not alone in this. I feel like it's a college football scenario. Back in the day when they'd be like, well, these players came here and who is paying what players, what is it? It's like, well, all of them are probably doing it. It's just who gets caught. I feel like we're probably going to learn that some of this was commonplace in American politics, where whether it was intentional or whether it was someone who just kept their eye off the ball, and fraud was, abused. Obviously not fraud was abused, but the federal government, the state government funding was abused.
These are deeper philosophical questions that come out of when you see how badly it was abused. The safeguards that are supposed to be there that were abused, those were abused. by fraudsters to defraud the taxpayer. And I think that's a bigger philosophical question of things like addiction recovery that is being outsourced by the federal government, by the state government to NGOs. You know, a lot of the times, and we've talked about this, is that the work that traditionally we held as that of the church, the people of faith that would go and reach the least of these, go to the people that need help, whether it be feeding the needy, clothing the needy, and things that church groups do, great work. When the mindset of, especially in ideology politically, replaces the state with the church. And when you think about even the separation of church and state, of the concept that Thomas Jefferson was writing about, wasn't what the left tried to make it. It was that he didn't want the state to corrupt the church. And that's what we've seen, is that the state has replaced the church in the minds of many politicians, for sure, but that work is like, this is the duty of the state. Yeah. So we are going to take, we are going to take your money and we are going to dole it out. And what happens when you get to states like Minnesota or California, where they have a lot more of the social programs, they take a lot more of the citizens' money to spend on these things. What you start to see is that the guidelines, the restrictions, the safeguards of protecting that and being good stewards of that, something that a lot of churches are very mindful of, the state doesn't necessarily have that. And a lot of times the bureaucrats are just making sure that they are meeting quotas and they are doing things. Or you even see in Minnesota where the bureaucrats were, what we see, trying to warn the state. This is out of control. We've got to do this for over a decade. And they were doing nothing about it. And a lot of that is because what happens when the safeguards are ignored and the communities that benefit from it happen to be a special interest group that gets certain types of politicians elected, then, those politicians want to make sure that money keeps flowing. Not necessarily because they think it's being stolen, but because they think it's making the populace of their constituents that vote for them happy with the work they're doing. And so it becomes a vicious cycle and it gets out of control, like you saw in Minnesota. And those safeguards then, when they get tried to put in place, become a political fight instead of a decency fight of protecting the hard-working taxpayers of Minnesota and protecting their investment in their state through their taxpayer dollars. It becomes a, how dare you, you're a racist Republican if you think that we shouldn't be helping the needy, when that's not what this is about.